Hi, it's good to be back. I'm Elaine Lindsay. This is Suicide Zen Forgiveness. I have recently lost my father, and today's episode is going to be a little different. I want to talk about waiting. I'll start by saying I never learned to wait well. I don't think I've ever learned to wait, period. And sadly, I've passed that on to my kids, my daughter more than my son. We got to a place where we move holidays up. And I think the earliest was December 3rd one year we had Christmas. And I realized that we just couldn't go on like that. We'd be having Christmas in summer shortly thereafter. Wait, I don't want to get lost in that other minutia because I have some things I really want to say. And some of it's really hard. I hope I get through it. My father. My father is my hero. My father is, I guess, the most important person in my life, the most important person that is left on this earth. And I want to take you through the past few weeks. You see, my dad died on March the 9th, 2025, due to a number of circumstances and the fact that it seems our family never does much that's straightforward or in the regular way. Let me just go through it as best I can. I had started writing it out when we left the funeral home. I was feeling so small and insignificant and utterly alone. I wasn't alone. I was with my husband, my son, my nephew. Let me backtrack and give you what I had then. See, I said my father died last Sunday in the wee hours of the morning, March the 9th. Being the only child left, and yet felt really weird to write child. I mean, I'm 69 years of age. But in fact, I am the only child. I spent the day waiting with hubby. That morning, when we got to Dad's, hubby went first. Dad had died in the night. And when I got there, we had called the doctor. So we were waiting for the doctor to call back because he had to come and pronounce my dad. 3 weeks before my father died, 3 weeks, maybe a month, we got news from the cardiologist that things were very, very bad with his heart. His lungs were filling with fluid and his kidneys were shutting down. I like to have things for real. I don't like people sugarcoating stuff. I hate false hope. I want to know how things are. And the cardiologist, who was a very kind man, he told me that the way things stood, it could be a month, it could be longer, but I should get in what I could. Back to the day, the doctor showed up within the hour, like he said. Now, we'd only met him a few weeks before this. He is one of 3 on a palliative care team in our area. They have in excess of 800 patients. Just think about that. Palliative care is end of life care. This is a small area of the city I live in. They have over 800 clients. It really boggles the mind. In my usual bent fashion, I met this soft spoken young man. He had red hair and a beard. And that first day we met him, I said to hubby that he could basically be 12 years old except for the beard. I think it's me now. Everybody just seems so young. He was very efficient and did what he needed and immediately got the medical box of supplies that we put in the house. The most important thing to my father, and the thing I fought with some of the doctors about, was him staying in his house. You see, my father developed dementia just before he turned 90. The dementia doctor said he would be better off in a home. I explained to him and my doctor, my husband, I explained to the dementia doctor and my father's physician that I come from a very different Scots family. Scots Irish, actually, if you count my mother. We came to this country basically with the clothing on our backs. My mother, my father, and me. And my grandmother and my aunt. They came with us in lieu of our material belongings because family is more important than anything. And my father told me they also came with a small box of dishes, the one thing my mother refused to part with. And when we got off the boat in Quebec, we had to take a train from Montreal to Ottawa to where we were going to be staying with my great aunt and her family. When we got to the train, one of the train people told my father that he couldn't take the dishes on the train. If they were going to go anywhere, they'd have to go in cargo. And he couldn't guarantee they would make it. My father somehow found a pen or something to write with, and he scribbled all over that box, fragile, fragile, fragile. He said he put it on every side and just prayed that it would make it because he didn't want to hurt my mother anymore. Things like that are what made it so important to my father to remain in his house. It's the house that, when they finally settled down and weren't being transferred anymore, my father, who was a military man most of his life, they bought a house together, and it was the first house they'd ever bought. And to him, as he said, he would only leave boots up. And I knew with no shadow of a doubt that if we tried to put my father in a home or a veteran's home or anywhere other than his house, we did. We tried to get him to come live with us, and he didn't want to. He said that wasn't fair to my husband. My husband loved my father as much as I do. It would have been just fine with us, but we were able to acquiesce to his wishes and he certainly didn't ask for much. We were there every second day until the last few weeks when it became every day. Back to that fateful day after the doctor left, we were waiting for the priest. You see, my father converted to Catholicism in 1953. Not, as everyone assumed, in order to marry my Scots-Irish Catholic mother. He actually converted because he wanted to become a Catholic since he was a boy. You see, my gran, his mom, was Catholic. She married my Church of Scotland granddad. And I don't know if she got to practice her religion openly. My grandfather was banished from the family home for this offense of marrying a Catholic. Back then, it was a very big offense. Now, they say often converts are the best, and my father is an absolutely model Catholic. When my parents finally returned to Ottawa from their posting in London, England, they settled in Orleans. The new development where they settled didn't have a parish of their own. So my father got on the committee that built the church and the school in the new Divine Infant Parish. I started in 1979 to talk about it. And he's been a parishioner ever since. After a couple of hours, the waiting was over. The priest came. Father Michael was his name. Very gentle soul. He made me feel better as he gave Dad the last rites. That was, I guess, the other last thing my father was adamant about. Father Michael spoke with me for a while before he too left. Left me to wait, this time, for the funeral home to come pick up my dad. The young men who came were very kind, very considerate. And one of them saw a Legion photo upstairs. And he came down and asked if my father was military. I said, absolutely. He was in the RAF in Britain. He joined the RCAF here and then became a UN peacekeeper. And he said they would go outside because they were going to make a point of covering him with the Canadian flag on the trip to the funeral home. It wasn't far from where Dad lived. I had no idea that this was only the start of what would become an absolute marathon of waiting. I loved the fact that the young man thought to offer my dad this honor. I know he'd be very proud. The waiting had to continue. See, I was waiting for a return message from my nephew. He had gone on vacation, basically a day and a half before, with his family in Mexico. And I was loath to contact him. I didn't want to interrupt their vacation. I didn't want their next vacation or the one after that to be colored by death. I grew up in a household that was colored by sickness constantly. My aunt was ill my entire life. And what we did or didn't do and where we went was predicated upon the phone ringing. And I didn't want my great nephew and niece both of them now young teens, to have to go through this feeling and this heartbreak every time something good happened or a vacation came. They loved their great granddad. They called him GGD very, very much. And I didn't want any happy times to forever be tinged with dread. I lived that. I would much rather give them the joy of their vacation and wait to break the news until they returned. And there was nothing they could have done. There was nothing that couldn't wait until the following weekend when they came back. My son and my nephew had, of course, discussed this prior to leaving. And not surprising, because this was not the first time we had lost someone in the family while one or both of them were unavailable. Time seemed to stand still. We had been at the house all day. We finally left to go home at 8 o'clock that evening. Makes me to go home to wait. And the waiting continued. I did speak with my nephew. My son had already told him what was happening. But I suggested he not tell the kids until they came home. I set up the meeting for the funeral home the following week, once they were back. But as the waiting continued, I got antsier and antsier. As each day passed, every morning was a fresh hell. I always called my dad in the morning, and it became like a splash of cold water every day as I'd stop myself from making that call, realizing it wasn't a possibility anymore. You know, a full week had passed, and I'm feeling like I've been put on ice. Finally leaving the funeral home. No further ahead in the process than I was before I went. It's exquisite torture. We went to see the funeral lady on Sunday. They actually had to change the person that was going to interact with us because I moved it up 2 days. It seems like such a silly reason. I was worried about my father being cold. One of the first things this woman said was that as a Catholic, my father should have known that he could have waited a while to die. Lent was not an appropriate time. And she made it a joke. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it appropriate, and it certainly wasn't timely. She went on to say, Lent, church time is at a premium. There are very few dates and times available for a funeral mass. My nephew and son are the co-executors of my father's estate. And all of us know the most important thing to my dad was the funeral mass. It's actually critically important. Nothing else can happen until that date is set. Now, she also told us something I didn't realize, that there are to be no flowers inside the church because it's Lent. There are no photos, adornments, etc. because it's Lent. No music other than that provided by the church. And I don't have a problem with that. I just had wanted to honor my father with some Scots music as well as some Canadian. My father was oh so proud to be Canadian. We finished with the woman as best we could. And now, as we head home, I keep thinking, oh, here we go. Hurry up and wait. Now, I realize that things take time. I do. I also get the universe is trying desperately to instill some patience in me. Well, another epic fail there. I don't do well with that, I guess. And I go stumbling through the days. Each day seems interminable, just goes on forever. And yet at the end of the day, I feel that I've been stuck in molasses and nothing happened. And that's not actually true because I chose to be the one to create the memoriam card. I wanted it to have both Canadian and Scottish symbols. And I added the Rabbie Burns Scottish death poem. I believe it's a epitaph for a friend. We followed the protocol of the military, displaying the correct medals, wearing the uniform of the last type of service my father provided. His final uniform, he was a UN veteran peacekeeper. He had been a UN peacekeeper in Gaza in the mid-70s. Dad was a sergeant retired in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And in the RAF, he did his first tour for 13 months, stationed at Aden, the British Crown colony of the United Kingdom, in what you now know as Yemen. I find myself usually chatty Cathy, who loves to talk about everybody and talk to everybody. I find myself who is usually chatty Cathy, not wanting to talk at all. I don't want to go anywhere. I just keep worrying about my dad. He's cold. All this waiting is just making it colder. You see, my dad and I had both reached a place in life where being cold is a 24/7 event. Dad was cold because 92. I'm cold due to liver issues. Really doesn't matter why. What matters is only Dad seemed to understand just how cold it was. I kept waking up in the night wondering, was I somehow failing him? Because it was taking so long and he'd be so cold. Then there was more waiting. Finally, the visitation evening came. And I had made a video with Mom and Dad and their friends and the family. I had to change it into a slideshow so it would work on the DVD that the funeral home had. And that was okay. On the memoriam card that I made, I added the Scottish blessing for death. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the hollow of his hand. tried my hardest to keep it together today because I am at a total loss as to how to go forward without him. And I know intellectually he was 92. I was oh so lucky to have him as long as I did. More than that, we were so lucky that he did not get dementia until he was basically a couple of weeks from turning 90. So we truly are blessed. It doesn't change the fact that I would still like to have my dad here. The other verse that I added, the one from Ravi Burns, I'd like to read it to you. An honest man here lies at rest, as ere God with his image blessed, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age, the guide of youth. Few hearts like his with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. This is my final goodbye to my dad. And yet, it's not, because we are waiting. We have to wait now for the graveside service. We have to wait to bury my father, because I live in the frozen white north, in the second coldest capital in the world. And we must wait on the ground thawing. There will be a military send-off as my father is buried alongside my mother in the military area of the cemetery. My father was a very, very good man. He was strict. He was honest. He was kind. He was funny. He was sarcastic. And I hope I pick up all his good traits and pass them on to my kids and grandkids. Because I think the world has lost a very, very decent human being. And that's my farewell to my dad. I thank you so much for listening. I know it's a different type of show today, but this too is part of living and part of what I'm living through. And as the Dark Pollyanna, there is a bit of an internal battle going on. But for today, I can say Pollyanna's winning. I thank you so much for being here, and say to you, make the most of your today, every day. And I look forward to seeing you again next time.